During the final weeks of World War II, American forces liberate a hidden Japanese military facility, where Korean and other Asian women were held as comfort women. When U.S. soldiers first encounter these survivors, they are struck by an unexpected sight. Despite enduring years of unimaginable trauma, many of the women are smiling. The story explores the complex psychology behind these expressions, whether they represent hope, fear, disbelief, or a learned survival mechanism, as both the liberators and the liberated struggle to understand each other across cultural and linguistic barriers in those first crucial moments of freedom. The air hung heavy and humid, a clinging shroud woven from the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the metallic tang of distant recent conflict. Sergeant John Miller, his uniform still stiff with the sweat of days past, his M1 Garand feeling both a comfort and a burden, led his small reconnaissance unit through a winding, overgrown track. The war, a monstrous beast that had devoured years of his life, was supposedly over. Yet the task of sifting through its ashes felt interminable, a grim extension of a fight already won. His boots, heavy with mud and the dust of a dozen unnamed battles, crunched against loose shale, each step a dull echo in the oppressive quiet. He was mid-30s, but the lines etched around his eyes and mouth spoke of a man decades older, jaded by too many battles, too many losses, too much senseless destruction. He yearned for the quiet hum of a Midwestern diner, the uncomplicated rhythm of a life he barely remembered, a life where the most pressing concern was the weather, not the next potential booby trap. He'd seen too much to be easily shocked, or so he thought. "Hold up," Miller rasped, his voice raw from the ever-present dust, raising a gloved hand. The four men behind him, young and weary but still sharp, froze instantly, melting into the dense foliage like seasoned phantoms. Ahead, barely visible through a thick curtain of mist and twisted branches, was a break in the natural landscape, a telltale scar of human imposition. A faint, almost imperceptible geometric pattern of rusted metal and weathered wood suggested a structure half swallowed by the encroaching jungle. The Japanese, masters of concealment, had clearly worked hard here. "Looks like a compound, Sarge," Private Thompson whispered, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a grimy hand. "Could be another one of their supply dumps." Miller nodded, his eyes scanning the perimeter, searching for any flicker of movement, any glint of steel. No movement. No sound beyond the persistent drip of moisture from the leaves, the distant caw of an unseen bird. Too quiet. A familiar knot of tension tightened in his stomach. Experience had taught him that the quietest places were often the most dangerous. They approached with practiced caution, weapons raised, safeties off, boots silent now, treading on the soft earth. The camouflage netting, once expertly woven into the canopy, had finally given way in places, revealing weathered concrete walls and the skeletal remains of a watchtower, a broken sentinel against the oppressive sky. The heavy steel gates hung askew, groaning softly in the breeze, a mournful sigh. Inside, the facility was a ghost town. Barracks, storerooms, a central administration building, all appeared abandoned, stripped of anything valuable or useful to the retreating enemy. Yet a disquieting sense of recent hurried activity lingered. A forgotten cigarette butt, still retaining a faint scent of harsh tobacco, lay near a doorway. A half-eaten bowl of rice, now a greenish-gray mold, sat on a crude table. They had left in a rush, a sudden, desperate retreat. Miller's mind raced, cataloging details, piecing together the last moments of the Japanese presence. Miller signaled his men to fan out, his senses on high alert. He pushed open a heavy wooden door, reinforced with rusted iron bands that screamed of brutal functionality. A wave of stagnant air, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, mildew, stale food, and something else, a cloying, sickly sweetness that made his stomach churn, hit him with an almost physical force. He stepped into a dimly lit, long room, the single window barred and grimy, offering little light to penetrate the gloom. And then he saw them. Huddled against the far wall, a dozen or so women, gaunt, disheveled. Their clothes were rags clinging to bony frames, their hair matted and dull. Their eyes, wide and terrified, were fixed on him, on his M1 Garand, on the menacing silhouettes of his men behind him. The atmosphere was thick with their fear, a palpable, suffocating presence that pressed down on Miller, making it hard to breathe. He had seen fear 1,000 times in 1,000 different faces, but never like this. This was a deeper, more primal fear, etched into their very bones. Miller, a veteran of countless brutal encounters, felt a strange hesitation. He slowly lowered his rifle, then removed his helmet, placing it gently on the floor beside him. He raised his hands, palms open in a universal gesture of peace. "No harm," he muttered, his voice rough, trying to convey reassurance, even though he knew they wouldn't understand the words. "American, we're here to help." He hoped the gesture, the softening of his stance, would cut through the terror. Silence, a profound, aching silence. Then, a slow, agonizing stir among the women. One by one, their gazes shifted. A young woman, perhaps early 20s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold ancient sorrows, cautiously looked up. Hannah. Her face was smudged with dirt, her lips cracked and dry, but as her eyes met Miller's, a flicker of something utterly unexpected crossed her features. A small, tentative curve of her lips. A smile. Miller blinked. He shook his head as if to clear the image. He expected tears, screams, accusations, anger, anything but this. Another woman, even younger, delicate features almost swallowed by terror, her limbs trembling, copied the gesture. A quick, almost involuntary twitch of her mouth. Yumi. The smiles were faint, almost ghostly but undeniable. A profound unease settled in Miller's gut, colder than the mist outside. It felt wrong. Profoundly, disturbingly wrong. He'd seen plenty of men smile before dying, or after being saved, but never like this. Never from this place. "Sarge, what the hell?" Private Thompson whispered behind him, his own face a mask of confusion, reflecting Miller's own bewilderment. "Are they happy?" Miller had no answer. He could only stare at the women, at those unsettling, ghost-like smiles. Just then, the familiar rumble of jeeps approaching the compound's dirt path broke the eerie silence. Captain Davies, Miller's commanding officer, a man whose uniform always seemed pressed, even in the field, strode in, followed by a woman in an officer's uniform, crisp and efficient, Dr. Eleanor Vance. Late 20s, dark hair pulled back severely, but her eyes held a keen, intelligent compassion that seemed at odds with the sterile military setting. She carried a medical bag with an air of quiet competence, her gaze immediately sweeping the room, assessing the scene. "Miller, what's the situation here? Any hostiles? Why haven't you secured them?" Davies barked, his eyes on the women, but his tone focused on procedure, on logistics, on the mission at hand. "No, sir. No hostiles," Miller said, his voice flat, still trying to process the bewildering sight. "Just women. They appear to be civilians." Dr. Vance's gaze immediately went to the huddled figures. Her clinical training allowed her to quickly assess their physical state. Severe malnutrition, visible injuries, signs of profound psychological shock evident in their rigid postures and hollow eyes. But then, her eyes, sharper than Miller's in this regard, caught the same faint, unsettling smiles. She tilted her head slightly, a frown of intense curiosity creasing her brow. It was a clinical observation, yes, but one tinged with deep concern, an immediate intellectual challenge to her psychological understanding. "Medic team, set up here and quickly," Vance ordered, her voice calm and authoritative, cutting through Davies's bluster. "Captain Davies, these women need immediate medical attention and psychological assessment. This isn't a combat situation anymore. It's a humanitarian crisis." The medic team, trained to respond to injury, moved in, their movements careful and gentle, a stark contrast to the rough efficiency of soldiers in battle. They offered water from canteens, then bland rations, to the hesitant women. Yumi flinched violently when a medic, a kind-faced young man, reached out to check her pulse, her automatic smile reappearing, wide and terrified, as if to ward off further pain, to appease, to make herself small and harmless. It was a mask, Miller realized with a jolt, a desperate, pathetic shield. "Sarge, did you see that?" Thompson mumbled, still looking shaken, his eyes darting between the women and Miller. "They're smiling, like Happy to see us? It just doesn't make sense. Miller shook his head, rubbing his temples. No, not happy. Something else. Something I don't understand. He turned to Vance, who was observing the women with an intense, almost analytical focus, jotting notes in a small pad. Doctor, what is that? Why are they smiling when they look like this? Vance met his gaze, her expression thoughtful, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's complex, Sergeant. Very complex. It could be a deeply ingrained survival mechanism, a learned deference to authority, particularly male authority. Or it could be a desperate attempt to appease perceived captors, which is what we initially are to them, despite our intentions. Or even a form of dissociative response to extreme, prolonged trauma, where their conscious mind distances itself from the immediate emotional reality. One thing is certain. It's certainly not a simple expression of happiness. Her voice was low, empathetic, but carried the weight of her professional conviction. We need to understand their language, their culture, their experiences. Without that, we're just guessing, and potentially doing more harm than good. Captain Davies, meanwhile, was barking orders into his field radio, already planning for their extraction, for the next step in the endless logistical dance of post-war operations. We've got about a dozen, possibly more. Need transport for repatriation. Get them out, process them, and move on. Another logistical hurdle in a long list of them. He dismissed Miller's and Vance's observations about the smiles as irrelevant, a distraction from the real mission. Miller, secure the perimeter. Vance, get them stabilized for transport. We can't afford delays on this mission. As the compound began to stir with the controlled chaos of the American presence, of medics moving with practiced efficiency, and soldiers securing the area, Hannah watched it all. Her smile, a thin, almost imperceptible line on her face, was her armor. It had been honed over years, a survival reflex ingrained by countless brutal lessons. The Japanese guards had demanded it. A blank face, a tear, a sign of defiance. These invited greater pain, more inventive cruelty. A compliant, submissive smile, however hollow, sometimes bought a moment of respite, a sliver of forgotten humanity. She observed the American soldiers with the acute intensity of a hunted animal. Their uniforms were different, their language a meaningless jumble of guttural sounds, but they were still men with weapons, with power. Her survival instincts screamed caution, a low thrumming in her veins. She had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and kindness often was just another trap. A young medic, his face still round and boyish despite the war, his hands gentle, knelt before her, offering a square of chocolate. It was foreign, dark, and sweet-smelling, a scent she had never encountered before. Hannah's first impulse was distrust. She remembered the gifts from the Japanese, always with a hidden price, a prelude to another violation. But the medic's eyes were kind, devoid of the cold amusement or predatory glint she had become accustomed to. His hand trembled slightly as he held it out, a gesture of pure, innocent offering. She hesitated, then slowly, carefully, reached out, her fingers brushing his. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible contact, but the warmth of his skin, the unexpected gentleness of his presence, was a shock, a memory of a world she had long forgotten. She took the chocolate. A brief soft flicker crossed her face then, a different kind of smile, faint but genuine, a raw, fragile expression of pure, unbidden emotion, touched her lips. Dr. Vance, watching from a distance, noted it, a tiny, hopeful crack in the carefully constructed facade. Hannah held the chocolate, its unfamiliar sweetness a stark contrast to the bitter taste of her past, to the sour tang of fear. She carefully unwrapped it, the crinkle of the paper a surprisingly loud sound in the charged silence of the room. She broke off a small piece, put it in her mouth, and the foreign taste exploded on her tongue. It was a sensation she hadn't experienced in years, pure, unadulterated pleasure, a brief, fleeting moment of simple joy. But even as she savored it, her vigilance remained. She quickly reevaluated the American soldiers, observing their reactions, their movements. This smile, the one that had just touched her lips, felt dangerous. It revealed too much. Her internal shield immediately snapped back into place, the bland, almost vacant smile of deference returning, a practiced mask against the world. She knew deep in her bones that the war for her was not over, even if the men with their guns claimed it was. The following day, a lifeline arrived in the form of Mrs. Lee, a Korean-American interpreter, elderly and stern, yet with eyes that held the collective pain of generations and a quiet, unyielding strength that radiated from her. She moved with an innate authority, her simple presence immediately commanding a respect from the women that no uniform could. Captain Davies requires information about the facility, any Japanese personnel, their movements. Mrs. Lee translated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, but her gaze was gentle and understanding as she addressed Hana and the other women. He wishes to know if there are other places like this. We need to understand what happened here, what they endured. Vance interjected, stepping forward, her voice clear and firm, not just for intelligence but for their own healing. We need to know their names, where they came from, if they have families. Davies sighed, impatiently tapping a pen against his clipboard, his face a picture of military exasperation. Doctor, I understand your concerns, and they're valid in their own context, but we have a chain of command and pressing military objectives. Their personal stories are important, yes, but not as urgent as actionable intelligence that could prevent further Japanese aggression or locate other enemy strongholds. Vance bristled but kept her voice even, refusing to be drawn into a shouting match. Captain, understanding their trauma is actionable. It informs their treatment, their repatriation, their very ability to survive this experience. The smiles Sergeant Miller observed are not trivial. They are a profound symptom of the conditions they endured, a testament to the psychological warfare waged against them. Mrs. Lee, ignoring Davies entirely, sat on the floor amongst the women, a posture of respect and empathy. She spoke softly in Korean, her words a balm, slowly, patiently coaxing tentative responses from the silent figures. Hana, perhaps sensing a kindred spirit, a bridge between two incomprehensible worlds, slowly began to share fragments. Not the brutal details of the physical abuse. Those horrors were too deep, too unspeakable for now. But the conditions, the daily humiliations, the constant terror, the pervasive atmosphere of absolute power and helplessness. She spoke of the psychological conditioning, the demand for subservience, for a certain demeanor, a perpetual state of agreeable docility. They made us smile, Mrs. Lee translated, her voice catching slightly, a rare tremor of emotion. Always. If we did not, if we looked sad or angry or empty, the punishment was worse. A smile meant we were compliant. Less trouble. It meant we were pleased to serve. We learned quickly. It became part of us. A second skin. Miller listened, a cold dread seeping into his bones, replacing his initial confusion with a profound sense of horror and injustice. The smiles, initially baffling, then disquieting, now twisted into something infinitely more tragic, more monstrous, a forced mask, a constant silent scream. He thought of the laughter and joy he associated with smiles, the innocent expressions of children, the genuine warmth shared between friends. To think of them as a tool of survival against unimaginable cruelty, a demand for performance under duress, was a desecration of the human spirit. He felt a quiet, simmering rage, a potent, dangerous emotion that had fueled him through countless firefights, now directed at an unseen enemy, a system of brutality. Vance, her face grim, added, "It's a form of learned helplessness combined with a perverse cultural expectation of female deference and total control. They were robbed not just of their bodies, but of their emotional authenticity. Their very expressions became weapons used against them, turning their faces into complicit masks. How do you recover when the language of your pain has been twisted into the language of your captors?" She stared at the women, then back at Miller. "We have to teach them how to frown again, how to truly cry, how to be angry without fear of repercussion." That afternoon, during the chaotic but necessary distribution of new clothes, basic hygiene supplies, and nutritional supplements, a younger, less experienced American soldier, eager to finish his task and return to his poker game, roughly gestured for a line of women to move faster. Yumi, still fragile, disoriented and weakened by starvation, stumbled, dropping the coarse blanket she had been given. The soldier barked at her in English, his tone impatient, unthinking. Instantly, Yumi's face contorted into that wide, terrified smile, her eyes darting like a trapped bird, anticipating retribution. But before the soldier could press further, before her terror could escalate, Hana stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Yumi and the American. Her own smile was still in place, a practiced facade, but there was an unyielding firmness in her stance, a glint of steel in her eyes that even the casual observer couldn't miss. "No," Hana said in heavily accented English, a single defiant word that carried the weight of years of suppressed rage. Mrs. Lee, standing nearby, quickly translated her firmer Korean. "She is weak. We go at our own pace. You will wait." The soldier, surprised by the unexpected defiance from someone he perceived as merely a docile victim, a nameless face in a crowd of suffering, hesitated, unsure how to react. Miller, who had been observing from a distance, drawn by the sudden tension, walked over with deliberate steps, his presence immediately diffusing the budding conflict. He placed a hand firmly on the young soldier's shoulder, a silent order to stand down. "Easy, son. Give them space. They've earned it." He met Hana's unwavering gaze and offered a slight, genuine nod of respect, an acknowledgement of her courage. He saw it then, truly saw it. The strength, the quiet resilience, the protective instinct burning fiercely beneath the forced composure, just like those strong women back home, protecting their own, no matter the odds. He realized the smiles weren't just a mask. They were a shield behind which incredible courage lay hidden, a profound wellspring of human spirit. Vance, witnessing the scene, approached Miller. "Sergeant, that was remarkable. Did you see her? Hana. She risked everything, even with that smile on her face. That's not compliance. That's pure, unadulterated strength." She explained further. "The smiles are not necessarily happiness, as you first thought, nor even merely submission. They are a complex tapestry of ingrained survival, cultural deference, certainly, but also a deeply protective mechanism. They are a way to signal non-threat, to blend in, to appease. But within that there can be immense internal fortitude. You saw it just now. A desperate struggle for control in a world where they had none." She drew parallels to other culturally specific coping mechanisms she'd studied, how seemingly passive acts could, in fact, be profound acts of resistance. One night, the compound's uneasy quiet was shattered by a piercing, inhuman scream. It was Yumi, thrashing violently in the throes of a profound night terror, her small body convulsing, her voice guttural and hoarse. Miller, on night watch, his senses always hyper-alert, sprinted towards the sound, his hand automatically going to his sidearm, the conditioned response of a soldier. He found her crumpled on the floor of the communal sleeping area, weeping uncontrollably, incoherent words spilling from her lips in a torrent of Korean. The other women were awake, huddled together, their own faces etched with fear, caught in the echo of their shared nightmares. Vance was quickly at his side, her face pale but composed, her professional calm a stark contrast to the raw emotion in the room. "Don't touch her, Sergeant, not yet. Just be present. Let her know she's safe, that you're not going to hurt her. Your presence, as a man in uniform, can be re-traumatizing if not handled carefully." Miller stood awkwardly, his combat training designed for aggression and swift action, utterly useless in this scenario. He felt a profound helplessness. He knelt a few feet away, placing his M1 Garand carefully on the floor, a conscious gesture of non-threat, of disarming himself in the presence of such profound vulnerability. He muttered soothing nonsense, the words themselves meaningless, but perhaps conveying an intent he desperately wished to communicate. "Easy, easy, it's okay. You're safe now. We won't let anyone hurt you." Vance sat closer, speaking in soft, measured tones. Her Korean, though less fluent than Mrs. Lee's, was enough to convey comfort. "Yumi, you are safe. No one will hurt you here. You are with friends." She offered a hand, a gesture of connection. Yumi, still shaking, eventually tentatively took it, her fingers gripping Vance's with surprising strength. Gradually, the screams subsided into ragged sobs, then quiet whimpers. As Yumi slowly regained awareness, her eyes, wide and unfocused, found Miller's. Her breath hitched. Then, a slow, shaky smile spread across her face. But this time it was different. Not the fear smile, not the blank compliance. This was raw, vulnerable, a fragile expression of relief and gratitude tinged with exhaustion, a fleeting moment of pure, innocent connection. It pierced Miller's hardened exterior, deepening his sense of responsibility, solidifying his commitment. The smiles, he understood now, were not just a mask. They were a language, complex and nuanced, and he was finally beginning to learn its vocabulary. Mrs. Lee, with Vance's careful guidance, began to facilitate more detailed conversations, creating a safe space for the women to share their experiences. Hannah, with quiet dignity and surprising courage, became the primary voice for the group, though her words remained guarded, carefully chosen. She described the chilling selection process, the daily inspections where their bodies were scrutinized, the meticulous routines designed to break spirits and erase individuality. She spoke of the Japanese officers, some brutish and openly cruel, others chillingly polite and detached, all equally devoid of humanity. She recounted a story of a young woman, barely out of her teens, no older than Yumi, who had dared to weep openly during an inspection, her grief too overwhelming to suppress. The punishment had been swift and brutally public, a calculated display meant to terrify the others into unwavering submission, to show them the ultimate cost of insubordination. After that, Mrs. Lee translated, her voice hoarse with suppressed emotion, her own eyes glistening. We learned to hide, to smile, to be invisible, even when we were not. It was the only way to keep a small piece of ourselves safe, even if it was just a lie on our faces, a lie we told with our very beings. Hannah added, her voice barely a whisper. The smile was our uniform, our only protection. Miller listened, the horror of it deepening with each translated phrase. The insidious nature of the oppression, forcing its victims to participate in their own degradation, to weaponize their own expressions, was almost more horrifying than the physical violence itself. He thought of his own sisters, his mother. The idea of them enduring such a fate, forced to smile while their souls were ravaged, twisted his gut with a burning intensity. He had fought against a visible enemy, but this enemy had invaded the very sanctity of the human spirit. Vance, witnessing Miller's quiet rage, spoke softly, her hand resting briefly on his arm. It's a powerful defense mechanism, Sergeant, a form of dissociation that allowed them to survive the unbearable. But it also deeply entrenches the trauma. To truly heal, to truly be free, they will need to reclaim their genuine emotions, no matter how painful that process is. They need to understand that it is safe to be sad, to be angry, to be themselves. She outlined the ethical dilemmas they faced, how to provide care without re-traumatizing, how to help them navigate a world that might not understand their smiles or the unspeakable nature of their past. Their path to healing is not a straight line, Sergeant. It will be messy and agonizing, and demand an immense amount of patience and empathy from us. Days turned into a week, then two. Captain Davies, impatient with what he perceived as the slow progress of Vance's psychological experiments, pushed harder for the women's immediate repatriation. Doctor, we have intelligence reports coming in from other sectors. Supply lines are stretched to breaking point, and we have dozens of other facilities to secure. We cannot babysit these women indefinitely while you conduct therapy sessions. They need to be processed and moved out. That's the protocol. Captain, their families may not want them back, or they may face severe social ostracization due to the stigma associated with what they've endured, Vance argued passionately, her voice rising in defiance of his authority. Their smiles, which we now understand, could be misinterpreted by their own communities as a lack of distress, making their plight even harder upon their return. We need to prepare them and their communities for this. This is not a simple logistical exercise. That's not our problem, Doctor, Davies retorted, his face reddening. Our problem is getting them off our books and back to their home countries. We are not a social welfare agency. We are the United States Army. Miller stepped forward, his voice low but firm, cutting through the rising tension. Sir, with all due respect, these women are war casualties, just as surely as any soldier who took a bullet. We have a moral obligation to ensure their safety and well-being beyond simply putting them on a boat and washing our hands of them. If we just ship them out, we're abandoning them to another form of suffering. He thought of Hana's quiet defiance, Yumi's fragile smile, the sheer will to survive hidden beneath their masks. He wasn't leaving them to face another battle alone, unequipped and unsupported. The Red Ball Express had moved millions of tons of supplies across impossible distances. Surely, the U.S. Army could move these women to safety and provide them with the dignity they deserved. Hana, who had been listening intently to Mrs. Lee's hurried translations, spoke up, her voice gaining a surprising strength and clarity. We are not baggage. We can choose. We are not cargo to be shipped. Inspired by Vance's empathy and Miller's unexpected advocacy, Hana began to encourage the other women. Slowly, tentatively, they started to practice. They learned English words, simple phrases, practicing them in hushed tones, finding power in expression. They began to draw, to write, to express themselves in ways that went beyond the forced smile. It was a painful, often terrifying process, revisiting the trauma, but a crucial one on their path to reclaiming their voices, to rebuilding their shattered identities. Vance facilitated group discussions, encouraging them to share their feelings, to identify and acknowledge their pain, to slowly shed the mask that had become both a prison and a shield. It was a long, arduous logistical operation of the spirit, demanding unconventional thinking and immense human endurance, much like the great supply lines of the war itself. One afternoon, a small group of recently captured Japanese soldiers, deemed low risk and no longer of significant intelligence value, were brought into the compound for processing by Davies. Among them was a gaunt, middle-aged man, his uniform stained and torn, his face a mask of weary defeat. He was one of the guards who had frequently been at this facility, a familiar figure of fear. As he was being led past the area where the women were gathered, his eyes, dark and flat, swept over them, a quick, dismissive glance. Then, his gaze lingered, narrowing. He recognized Yumi. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossed his face before he quickly averted his gaze, trying to shrink into himself. Yumi saw him. Her eyes, which had been dull with exhaustion and the lingering fog of trauma, suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. For a split second, the old, terrified smile twitched at her lips, an automatic muscle memory reflex. But then, something primal, something deep and powerful, something that had been buried beneath years of abuse, erupted from her. It wasn't a whimper, nor a sob. It was a guttural, raw cry of pure, unadulterated rage and pain, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the humid air. It was long, desperate, and utterly shattering, echoing off the concrete walls, a primal shriek of violated innocence and seething fury. The Japanese soldier flinched violently, visibly recoiling. Every American soldier present froze, shocked by the raw, untamed emotion that vibrated through the room. Miller felt a jolt of profound understanding, a shiver running down his spine. This was the true expression of her suffering. The forced smiles were the lie. This terrifying, beautiful scream was the truth, the reclaiming of a humanity that had been systematically denied. It was a sound of profound liberation, a reclaiming of her voice, her identity, her pain, a complete rejection of the false mask she had worn for so long. He looked at Vance, whose eyes were wet with tears, but a faint, hopeful smile, a genuine one, touched her own lips. The scream finally subsided, leaving an unnerving, almost sacred silence in its wake. Yumi, trembling violently, collapsed into Hana's arms, who held her close, her own face now streaked with tears, her smile finally gone, replaced by an expression of fierce, protective solidarity and raw grief. The Japanese soldier was quickly moved away, his head down, but the incident hung in the air, a visceral testament to the horrors these women had endured and the beginning of their release. The smiles were not a sign of acceptance, Miller now knew, but of a strength so profound it had twisted their faces into a mask to survive. And now, they were beginning to shed that mask. As the weeks passed, the challenges of freedom became as complex as the ordeal of captivity. A difficult truth emerged. Repatriation was not a simple solution, a magic cure. Some women, fearing intense ostracization by their families and communities who might view them as tainted or dishonored, chose to seek refuge elsewhere, to build entirely new lives in foreign lands. Others, with the invaluable support of Mrs. Lee and Vance, painstakingly worked to trace what remained of their families, preparing for the arduous, emotionally fraught journey home, knowing that acceptance was not guaranteed. The logistical web was immense, requiring the same kind of coordinated effort and decentralized decision-making that characterized the Red Ball Express, but applied to human souls rather than tonnage. Hannah, with quiet dignity and unwavering determination, announced her intention to stay with Mrs. Lee, offering her assistance as an interpreter and advocate for other women who might be discovered, dedicating herself to ensuring no other survivor endured what they had without help. Her smile now was fundamentally different. It was genuine, radiating a quiet strength, a hard-won peace, a profound sense of purpose. She offered it freely to Miller and Vance, a symbol of her resilience, her choice, her future, a choice she had made, not one forced upon her. Miller, his tour of duty officially over, faced a choice. The pull of home was strong, but the indelible marks left by these women were stronger. He volunteered to stay, extending his commitment to assist in the complex process of identifying and supporting survivors, to fight the bureaucratic battles, to secure the resources they so desperately needed. His earlier pragmatism, once a survival tool, had been replaced by a profound sense of purpose, a deep moral calling. The war had ended for the world, but for him, a new battle for humanity had just begun, a quieter, more personal, but equally vital conflict. His perspective on suffering, on resilience, on the quiet heroism of survival, had been irrevocably altered. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a witness, an advocate, a student of the enduring human spirit. Dr. Vance, equally changed by the experience, dedicated herself to establishing long-term psychological support programs for survivors of war, recognizing the immense, often invisible scars left by conflict. The smiles of the comfort women had taught her that the battle for the mind could be as brutal and as crucial for ultimate victory as any physical engagement. Her work, a testament to the women's strength, would lay the groundwork for future trauma care, redefining how the military understood the psychological impact of war, not just on soldiers, but on all its victims. Years later, Miller received a letter, handwritten, the English still careful but now entirely fluent. It was from Hannah. Enclosed was a photograph. Hannah stood, arm in arm with Mrs. Lee, surrounded by a group of women and children, their faces alight with hope and purpose. She was smiling, a wide, unburdened smile that reached her eyes, a smile of genuine joy and quiet strength, a laugh lines etched around her eyes from true happiness, not forced compliance. It was not the smile of a victim, but of a survivor, a leader, a woman who had reclaimed her own spirit and was now helping others reclaim theirs. She was, as the Red Ball Express drivers, moving the world in her own way, through sheer will and enduring spirit. He looked at the photograph for a long time, the image burning itself into his memory. The question, "Why are they smiling?" had once been a source of profound confusion, then disquiet, then unbearable pain. Now it was a testament to the unquantifiable strength of the human spirit, a silent anthem of survival, a profound affirmation of life itself. The smiles, he realized, were never about happiness in the moment of their captivity. They were about endurance. They were about the fierce, unyielding will to live. And in their reclamation, they had become finally about freedom, a freedom hard-won, cherished, and shared. If this story and the profound lessons it holds about resilience, empathy, and the hidden depths of the human spirit resonated with you, please consider liking this video. And to ensure you don't miss future explorations of challenging yet vital narratives, subscribe to our channel and join our community. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to light.